He always believed their love was honest, until the day she died, and whispered something that shattered everything. She said, "I never married you for love." The room was dim, the ticking clock echoed too loudly. Oliver sat by the bed, holding the frail hand of the woman he had loved for over 3 decades. Her breath was shallow, her eyes closed, then opened again, not with fear but with something heavier, truth. She looked at him and said it, quietly. No tears, just words that sliced through the silence. "I married you because I was afraid, not because I loved you." He didn't speak. He couldn't. He thought he knew her. He thought their love had been enough. But now, he wasn't sure of anything. The year was 1955. In America, the laws may not have always been written, but they were enforced with fists and fire, especially in the South. Oliver Bryant had grown up learning how to survive, not just as a man, but as a black man. Where you walked, how you looked at someone, where you sat, could be the difference between living and disappearing. He'd seen it happen. He'd seen it too many times. His father had spent his life breaking his back in a factory that didn't know his name. His mother cleaned homes that looked nothing like their own. Oliver grew up fixing engines. It was the only place where his hands had value, even if his face didn't. And yet, in that world, there was a girl. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. The daughter of a man who had built his fortune on control. The kind of man who measured people by bloodlines and loved power more than his own child. Sarah was raised behind velvet curtains, in houses with polished floors and iron rules. She wasn't meant to make choices, she was meant to obey. But that night, in a smoky basement where jazz bled through the walls like rebellion itself, she met Oliver. She looked at him like he was more than what the world told her he was. She moved toward him like no one was watching. And for a moment, it felt like the rules didn't matter. Just music, just breath, just eyes meeting where they weren't supposed to. They met again and again, until they stopped pretending that love didn't live in the space between them. But the world they lived in did not forgive that kind of love, especially not her father. One night he found them, her hand in Oliver's, her eyes soft, his afraid. The man said nothing, just dragged her away. And the next morning, a note appeared under the garage door. "Stay away from my daughter." It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. But what Charles Whitmore didn't know was this: Sarah had already made her choice. "Just say the word," Oliver whispered. "I'll walk away." She looked at him and shook her head. "No, I'm walking with you." And in that moment, they ran. Not for freedom, not for justice, just for a chance to love each other somewhere no one knew their names. But they had no idea that the real danger hadn't even begun. The air was thick that night, not with heat, but with everything they were about to leave behind. Sarah stood under the rusted tin roof of the abandoned train station. In one hand, a worn leather suitcase. In the other, nothing, but it trembled. Her dress clung to her legs in the wind, and her heart beat louder than the distant clatter of the freight train coming in. She turned one last time. The streets behind her were still, too still. No headlights, no footsteps, but she didn't believe in silence. Not anymore. Oliver waited in the shadows. He had no suitcase, no past worth packing, just his hands and his decision. He saw her coming, blonde hair tucked under a scarf, eyes wide but not with fear, with conviction. She came to him and didn't say a word. He reached out, calloused fingers meeting hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded, not because she was fearless, but because she was done being afraid. They boarded a freight train bound north, hiding between crates of grain and sacks that smelled of rust and old roads. It wasn't comfort, but it was distance. And distance to them meant survival. No one knew they were gone. No one saw them leave. For the first time in her life, Sarah was untraceable. The journey was brutal. The train didn't care that she was tired, that her back ached, that her stomach turned with nerves. Oliver barely spoke. His eyes scanned every opening, every noise. Every time the wheels slowed, he stiffened, expecting to be dragged out and beaten, or worse. But no one came. On the second night, Illinois met them with smoke. The factory town wasn't pretty, the air stung, the streets were stained, but no one stared, no one shouted. It wasn't acceptance, it was indifference. And for them, that was enough. They found a room in a boarding house that smelled of mildew and boiled potatoes. The bed creaked when they sat down, and the wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, but it was theirs. Oliver got work at the steel mill, 12 hours a day, skin scorched, muscles torn. Sarah found a sewing job, blisters on her fingers, needles pricking skin that had never worked a day in its life. But they were building something. Together. And then, one Sunday morning, they walked to a tiny church on the edge of town. Just the two of them. No guests, no music. Just the sound of a preacher saying words that didn't care what color they were. There were no rings, no photographs, only a vow. I'll stay, even when the world says I shouldn't. After the preacher walked away, Sarah stepped outside. She looked up at the sky, gray and wide, and let the wind touch her face. She was no longer Sarah Whitmore. Not the daughter of a powerful man, not a Southern girl in silk, not someone who followed rules written by other people. She was Sarah Bryant, a wife, a worker, a woman who had chosen her life. And yet, somewhere in her chest, something twisted, because choosing freedom didn't mean the past had let go. That first year tested them. The neighbors watched them like a crack in the wall they couldn't fix. Whispers followed Sarah through the market. Some days money didn't stretch far enough. Some nights, Oliver came home and sat on the floor, too sore to stand. But they didn't complain, they laughed. Sometimes, they kissed. Always. They survived. And when she found out she was pregnant, Sarah sat in the dark for hours, hand over her belly, remembering a different child. One no one knew about. A boy, born behind a closed door, taken before she could name him, erased. Oliver didn't know, and she told herself he didn't need to, because this time she would do things right. But the past doesn't forget, and secrets never sleep for long. The boy came on a rainy afternoon. The roof of the boarding house leaked in 3 places. The room smelled of wet fabric and boiled rice. Oliver held Sarah's hand as she screamed, her face slick with sweat, her voice cracking against the thunder outside. When it was over, the midwife whispered, "It's a boy." She placed the baby in Sarah's arms, tiny, warm, breathing, and something in Sarah broke, not with pain, but with memory. She stared into her son's eyes. They were wide and dark, a mirror of Oliver. His fingers gripped her pinky, stronger than they should have been. His skin, a soft, perfect blend of hers and his. Isaac. That's what they named him. And yet, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about another child. The one she had never named. She had been 17. Her father had called it a disgrace. Her mother had called it a problem. And no one called it hers. The baby was born in secret, taken in silence. A nurse had placed the newborn in her arms for only a moment, just long enough for her to see the shape of his mouth. Just long enough to fall in love. And then, he was gone. No words, no explanation. Just a payment to a stranger, and a lie to the world. Sarah has gone away for her health. She had cried until there was nothing left, then buried the pain beneath silk dresses and obedient smiles, until she met Oliver. And believed? Maybe some things didn't have to follow her. But now, holding Isaac, her real beginning, she couldn't stop asking herself, did the other boy have eyes like these? Did he cry the same way? Was someone rocking him to sleep at this very moment, whispering a name that was never hers to give? She didn't tell Oliver, because what could she say? That the woman he married wasn't whole? That she had loved a child she never fought for? No, this secret belonged to her past, and she had already left that behind, hadn't she? Isaac grew fast. He smiled with his whole face. He laughed before he learned to crawl. Oliver loved that boy like air. Every night he came home from the mill, soot still clinging to his clothes, and scooped Isaac into his arms. "How's my little thunder?" he'd say, kissing the boy's forehead. But Sarah began to drift, not from Oliver, not from Isaac, from herself. She couldn't name it. The ache, the restlessness, the guilt that pressed against her ribs when she held her son close. She had thought love could cover everything, but the past was a ghost with sharp teeth, and it knew her name. And then came the second child, Margaret. A storm in a little girl's body. She cried louder, laughed wilder, climbed things she shouldn't. She was light and fire and noise, and Sarah loved her completely. But the weight inside her didn't disappear. It grew. Because now she had 2 children she would never lose, and one she had already let go. The dreams began after Margaret's first birthday. Always the same, a boy, standing at the end of the hall, not moving, not speaking, just watching. She would wake in sweat, fingers clenched, heartbeat wild, and sometimes in the morning she would find herself staring out the window, waiting. For what? A letter? A consequence? She didn't know, but the ache never left, and Oliver noticed. He noticed the quiet, the long silences, the way she would look at the children, then look away. He asked once, "Are you tired?" She nodded. "Is it me?" She shook her head, and that was it. Oliver had learned not to push, but something inside him whispered she's hiding something. What he didn't know was that her secret was older than their love, and it was waking up again. Sarah had always believed she could outrun it. The past, the shame, the child she never got to keep. She told herself love could be louder than regret, that building a new life would silence the old one, but the silence had only grown teeth. It began with the letter. A thin white envelope slipped under their door one afternoon. No return address, no stamp, just her name, written in the unmistakable hand of a man she had spent years trying to forget. Her father. She stared at it for a long time, long enough for the potatoes on the stove to boil dry, long enough for the children to grow restless. She opened it. Only one line inside. "You do not understand what you've done." No signature, no warmth, just the chill of a man who believed he still owned her, even now. She didn't tell Oliver. She didn't want to see his face tighten, didn't want to feel the weight of his worry, so she burned it in the sink. Watched the words curl into smoke, but smoke can't erase a feeling. And that night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her fingers tracing the edge of the sheet, trying to pretend she hadn't begun to tremble. Then she saw the man. At the market, not shopping, not speaking, just standing. In a gray suit, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on her from across the street. She turned quickly, pulled Margaret closer. Her stomach twisted. Was it him? She couldn't be sure. But he came again. And again, always at a distance, always watching. She told herself she was imagining it, that the stress was making her see things. But when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman who had run away. She saw a mother who had something to lose, everything to lose. The second letter came a week later. It wasn't from her father. Different paper, different hand, but the message cut even deeper. "I know who you are." That was all. No signature, no explanation, just a fact she had buried so deeply it now felt like someone had reached into her chest and pulled it out. Someone new. Not about her marriage, not about Oliver, but about him. The first boy. The child she had given away. She could barely breathe as she read the letter over and over, her hands shaking. Was it him? Was he alive? Did he hate her? Did he even know he had once been hers? She tried to hide it, tucked the letter in the bottom of her drawer. Told herself it was a mistake, a trick, but Oliver found it. Late one evening, searching for a clean handkerchief, she walked into the room and saw him standing there, letter in hand, his brow furrowed. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. She saw the question in his eyes, and the quiet grief of a man who had just discovered he didn't know his wife at all. They didn't fight. Oliver wasn't the kind of man who yelled, but his silence spoke more than any raised voice ever could. He left the letter on the table, walked outside, stood in the yard for hours. She watched him from the window, and in that moment she realized something she hadn't dared name. He might not forgive her. And for the first time since they fled the South, Sarah understood. This wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about truth, and truth had never been safe. And just when she thought the weight couldn't get heavier, her body began to betray her too. It started small, a cough that wouldn't leave, a dizzy spell while hanging clothes, a sharp twisting pain in her chest that made her grip the edge of the kitchen counter and pretend it was nothing. But Oliver saw it. He saw her flinch when lifting the laundry basket, saw the color drain from her cheeks as she stirred the soup. He asked if she was all right. She nodded, like always, but her body was already telling the truth. One evening, as the children played quietly in the other room, Sarah collapsed. No cry, no sound, just her body folding gently to the floor like a curtain being drawn. Oliver rushed to her side, held her in his arms. Her breath was shallow, her skin cold. The next morning, the doctor came. A white man, mid-50s, with a gaze too practiced to offer comfort. He checked her pulse, asked questions, took his time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "It's her heart. It's failing. There's nothing we can do." Oliver didn't believe it. He searched for another doctor, another answer, a different fate, but the answer never changed. And Sarah stopped pretending. She began to sleep more, move less. The pain came in waves, sharp and sudden, but she didn't complain because now she understood. She was running out of time, and there was something she still hadn't done. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the chimney tops and the light spilled orange into the kitchen, she asked Oliver to sit with her. He hesitated. She looked at him not like a wife, not like a patient, but like someone preparing to step into the dark. "Please," she said, and he sat. Her voice was quiet, the way someone might speak in a church. And then she told him everything, about the money she had hidden in the early days, when the fear was louder than the love. About how, more than once, she had thought of leaving, not because he had failed her, but because she wasn't sure she could belong in the life they had built. She told him about the child, the boy born when she was 17, the one her father took, the one she never named, the one she dreamed of still. She told him about the letters, about the man in the suit, about the second letter, the one that said, "Your son is looking for you." And then she told him the hardest thing of all, that when she married him, when they ran in the night, boarded that train, built a life from nothing, it hadn't been because of love. It had been because she was afraid, because he had been the first person who looked at her and didn't see property, because he was the only escape she could find from the cage her father had built. She looked at him then, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not asking for forgiveness, just the chance to be honest. Before the silence came, "I love you," she said. "Now, I love you now, not because I ran, but because I stayed." Oliver didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on hers, but she couldn't read them. She didn't know if he was angry, or broken, or just empty, and she didn't ask, because she knew what he did next would be his choice. That night, as her body trembled with fever and her breath grew shallow again, Oliver sat beside her. He wiped her forehead, held her hand, sang to her, low and slow the way he once had for Isaac. He didn't say much, but just before she closed her eyes, he leaned close and whispered something, soft. So soft she almost didn't hear it. Her lips curled, not into a smile, but into peace, and then she was gone. What he whispered, no one else would ever know. But in that final moment, Sarah believed he had forgiven her. Or maybe he hadn't. Maybe forgiveness was never the point. Maybe love in its deepest form isn't about being right. Maybe it's about staying, even when you finally know the truth. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into the corners, into the walls, into the space where a voice used to live. Sarah was gone, and Oliver sat in their bedroom, staring at the pillow that still held the faint shape of her head. He hadn't moved it, as if by leaving it untouched he could pretend she might still return. But pretending had never felt so hollow. She had died in his arms, after speaking the truth he never expected, after giving him answers to questions he hadn't dared ask. But not all the answers, because when he opened her drawer searching for one of her scarves to hold on to, he found it, a letter, tucked beneath old receipts and scraps of cloth, folded, unassuming. He opened it slowly. The ink had faded, but the words still cut. "Your son is looking for you." Oliver froze, his breath caught in his chest. Your son. Not Isaac, not Margaret. A son he had never known existed. A boy Sarah had carried alone, given away, buried in silence. He sat down at the kitchen table, the letter before him like a wound that refused to close. The words played over and over in his mind, not just the fact of it, but the weight of it. She hadn't told him. Even after everything she confessed, she had held this back. Why? Was it shame, fear, protection, or had she always intended to take that secret with her into the ground? He stared at the letter. His hands trembled. His eyes burned. It wasn't the betrayal that undid him. It wasn't even the lie. It was the unknowing. Because now, every memory felt fragile. Every laugh, every quiet morning, every touch. He found himself asking, was it real? Had she ever truly chosen him? Or had he just been the door she ran through to escape someone else's prison? And what about the boy? Where was he now? What had he grown up believing? That his mother didn't want him? That she had vanished without a trace? And worse, did he know Oliver existed? Days passed. Oliver returned to the steel mill, not because he was ready, but because work was the only thing that didn't ask questions. 12-hour shifts, burning heat. He let the sweat carry the pain out of him, let the weight of the machines muffle the weight in his chest. But every night, he returned to that kitchen, to that table, to that letter. Isaac and Margaret didn't ask. They missed their mother in the way children do, loudly, then softly. But they didn't know what she had left behind. Oliver didn't tell them, because he hadn't decided what to do yet. He didn't even know what he felt, until one night, he imagined something different. He imagined a man, standing at the edge of a road, holding a letter of his own, wondering if anyone would write back. He imagined it was Isaac who had been taken, raised by strangers, never told where he came from. Wouldn't he want the truth? Wouldn't he deserve to know? Oliver rose before dawn, put on his coat, stepped out into the morning chill. He walked to the post office, letter in hand, stepped slow, measured. He didn't know where the sun was, didn't know who had written the letter. But he knew this: the past had taken too much already. He wouldn't let it steal what was left. He stood at the counter, took out a blank sheet of paper, and began to write. Not an apology, not a justification, just the truth. Because sometimes the most honest thing you can say isn't "I'm sorry," it's "I'm here." The letter was sent. No guarantee it would reach the right person. No address to return to, just a name, and a truth that had waited too long to be spoken. Oliver didn't expect a reply. He didn't expect anything at all, but he needed to do it. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, for honesty. Because in a life shaped by silence, he had finally found the courage to speak. Weeks passed, the routine resumed. Meals, school, work, laundry. But the rhythm had changed. Sarah's absence was everywhere. In the sound of Margaret's laughter that no longer bounced off her mother's smile. In the way Isaac lingered near Oliver in the evenings, not saying it out loud, but needing presence. In the smell of fabric, still clinging to Sarah's old scarf. One night, Margaret asked a question. She sat at the edge of the bed, legs swinging. "Daddy, why don't we talk about Mama's family?" Oliver looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were sharp like her mother's. Her mouth always half a second from a challenge. He could lie, say they were complicated, say they were far away. But she deserved more than silence. He told her about the South, about rules that didn't make sense, about love that cost too much, about Sarah and the courage it took to choose a harder life. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. But enough for Margaret to say, "I think Mama was braver than people gave her credit for." And Oliver nodded, because he was finally starting to believe that too. And then, the reply came, a plain white envelope, no return address again, but this time the handwriting was different, younger, less certain. Oliver opened it slowly. His fingers trembled, but his heart steadied. "I think you might be my father. My mother's name was Sarah Whitmore. I never met her. I only have questions. Please tell me if I'm wrong. I'd like to know who she really was." Oliver sat at the table, the letter before him. The house was still, the children asleep, and in that silence something shifted. Not grief, not regret, something lighter, like a door opening. He didn't know what this young man looked like, didn't know what life he had lived, what he'd been told, but he knew this: he was Sarah's son. And that meant he was part of Oliver's story too. Not because of biology, not because of guilt, because when someone searches for truth, you don't close the door, you open it, you leave the light on, you write back. So he did. And this time, he didn't hesitate. He told him who Sarah was. Not just the girl who ran from the South, but the woman who stayed when staying was harder. The woman who carried guilt like a second spine. The mother who whispered Isaac's name like a prayer. Who stitched Margaret's dresses by hand. The woman who learned to love, even when she didn't know how. He told him about the nights she cried without reason, about the ways she held old letters and stared into them like they could bleed, about the truth she confessed before the end. And then, Oliver wrote something that surprised even him. "She didn't marry me for love, but she died loving me." He sealed the letter, walked it to the mailbox, and as he let it fall into the slot, he exhaled, not because everything was healed, but because healing had finally begun. Weeks turned into months. Then came the knock. One afternoon, just as Isaac was setting the table and Margaret was humming to herself in the yard, a man stood at the door, late 20s, tall, pale eyes, holding a small envelope. He didn't speak right away. Neither did Oliver. They didn't need to. Because something unspoken passed between them. Not the weight of blood, but the quiet recognition of a shared wound. And maybe the chance to close it. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and laughter echoed from the backyard, Oliver stepped outside. He looked at his children, and at the young man now sitting among them. Still a stranger, but no longer alone. He thought of Sarah then, of all she never said, all she carried, all she gave, and he whispered into the wind, "You're here, in all of this." Because love, in the end, wasn't about the story being perfect. It was about what survived after the silence. Would you like me to move on to the image and motion prompt table for this script?